Hey everyone. In this video we're going to talk about how we calculate the actual cost for labor and benefits. So if you're working right now, do you know how to calculate how much money you're owed by your employer before taxes? Because obviously taxes, there's tables and things like that they use to figure that out. But do you know how to figure out how much money you should be getting before they start doing all the deductions, right? That's how much money it costs us as an employer to pay staff. Even though there's deductions coming off of it, they go towards medical or dental or taxes or things like that. But we still, as the employer, pay that gross income or that pre-taxed income, right? Do you know how much money you would be getting if you worked 40 hours versus 45 hours, right? Because there's a magic number in there of what time it turns into overtime versus regular time, right? In Canada, it's anything over 8 hours a day and 44 hours a week. And I'll get into that and we calculate it in some examples coming up, right? Have you ever been scheduled for a certain number of hours only to find out by the end of the week you've worked more or fewer hours? That happens in our business all the time. As business fluctuates, as managers, most of us do our best to forecast how many customers we think they're coming into the restaurant and what they're going to eat. And that's not always right. I mean, you can't control things like the weather. You can't control things like a pandemic that's going to drastically change your business cycles, right? So there may be times where people are sent home early from a shift, or sometimes, we've just picked up this reservation for 50 people tomorrow. I need somebody else to come in and work, right? So when you're using a work schedule and a list of each employee's hourly wage or annual salary, a manager can calculate a department's weekly standard labor cost. So using the schedule, we can calculate how much we are going to spend on that week if everybody works the hours that are on the schedule. And we call that standard because that's what we've budgeted. When we built that schedule, that's what the plan was. That's what the budget was. Everybody's going to work these shifts for this many hours. They get paid this much. We know what that schedule is going to cost us, right? But at the end of the week, that schedule, I don't know about where you work, but where I worked, there was always like pencil scribble. Somebody called in sick and somebody worked overtime to cover, and it's not always the same at the end of the month. So then we've got what we call our actual cost, which is what we actually spent for that week. And generally they're going to be different, right? They should be similar, but sometimes there's going to be a little bit of difference in them, right? So how do we calculate labor cost for hourly workers? Well, first we do something called our preliminary labor cost. And that's simply the hours they worked times the hourly rate, right? Preliminary means before benefits. So before we've paid them medical, dental, things like that are over top, which costs us money on top of their hourly rate, we want to first calculate their hourly rate, right? We use our scheduled hours, which yields our standard cost, and then the actual hours are going to yield our actual cost, right? The actual amount of time they worked, okay? So first example, an employee earns $11.75 an hour and is scheduled for 45 hours in the week. What's this employee's preliminary standard labor cost? Now, something to note in the slides and in your textbook, it's going to talk about overtime being 1.5 times the regular rate after 40 hours. But in Canada, it's not. It's anything over 8 hours a day or 44 hours in a week. So in this case, overtime would take place after 44 hours. So that means they've got 44 hours of regular time and 1 hour of overtime, right? And overtime is times 1.5 and regular time is just times 1. And we have it equals times 11.75 per hour times 11.75 per hour. So if we multiply that out, 44 times 11.75 means they got $517 in regular pay. And then they have 1.5 times 11.75 in overtime, which is another $17.63. We add those two together and we end up with their preliminary cost of $534.63 for that week. That's in Canada. And remember these in Canada. Anything over 44 hours per week or 8 hours per day. If we knew what their schedule was, let's say we knew Saturday, or like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And they were off on Sunday, but they worked 8, they worked 9, they worked 4, they worked 10, they worked 8, and they worked 8. Okay? So right off here, we're going to figure out our regular time and our overtime. Okay? So regular time, this was 8 hours. Oh, this is 8, and we've got 1 hour of overtime because it was over that 8 hours a day. This, we have 4 hours of regular time. This one is 10 hours, so we have 8 hours of regular time and 2 hours overtime. This one's regular time, this one's regular time. Now, we're going to see, are we over 44 hours in the week? 8 times 3, 8 times 5 is 40 plus 4, so we have 44 hours exactly in the week. So we don't have any more overtime. What happens if this was, say, a 6-hour day? And we ended up with 46 hours in the week. That means we have 2 more hours of overtime for the week. So this would go down to 44 hours, and then we would have 2 plus 2 plus 1, we'd have 5 hours of overtime. So 44 times 11.75 would give us still our 517, right? That hasn't changed. But now we have 5 hours of overtime times 11.75 times 1.5, which gives us $88.13. Add the two together, and we get a pay of $605.13 for the week. But that's because I changed the example so that we knew what they were working every day, right? So remember, in Canada, anything over 44 hours a week or 8 hours a day. But you have to take out this 8 hours a day first before you calculate anything over the 44 hours in the week. Okay. Salaried workers. Now, salaried workers are a little bit different because they get a paycheck that goes for the whole year, right? So they get the same size paycheck each week no matter how many hours or days they work. The annual salaries can be divided into daily salaries by dividing by 365 days per year. Now, the question I always get is, why can't we just divide by 52? Well, that's because there aren't exactly 52 days in the year, right? If we take 365 and divide by 52, we get 7.02 days, right? So if we take 365 divided by 7 days in a week, we get 52.14 weeks, right? So what we want to do is we want to take their salaries, divide by 365 days of the year, and then multiply times 7. That'll give us our weekly cost per week, as you'll see in the following formula that comes up, right, for our preliminary cost. Yeah, so then we multiply times 7, okay? So next example, we've got a salaried worker that's making $40,000 per year, and we want to know what the weekly labor cost is before benefits. So simply we take the $40,000, divide by 365 days in the year to get a daily rate of $109.59. And now we multiply that times 7 days in a week to get 767.12. Now this is going to be the same in Canada as it is anywhere in the world, because with a salaried person, overtime is mute, right? We don't have overtime for salaried people. They agree to work whatever it takes per week, whether it's overtime or under, right? Generally, you'll find salaried people will work during the busy times, they'll work a little bit of overtime, and then during the lower times, they'll work a little bit less than full-time. All right, so the next thing we have to consider is benefits, because benefits are a cost to us as the employer, and obviously a benefit to the employee, right? You know, medical, dental, whatever your business decides to give as benefits. We saw a big list in the last chapter of possible benefits, and there's more. Travel expenses, company car, depending what your position is, right? So there's always the legally mandated ones, and then there are the over and aboves. So you, as an employer, have to figure out what the percentage is of your employees' salaries that includes benefits. So you do a whole calculation to figure out what that percentage was, and then apply, if you wanted to figure out their weekly labor costs, like we just did, you would apply that percentage, much like Spice Factor or GST or any other percentage that we've added in the past, right? So here's an example. An employee is scheduled for 39.5 hours at $9.50 per hour. Benefits cost is 13.8%. And what is the employee's standard labor cost? So we don't have to worry about overtime, because whether you're in Canada or anywhere, 39.5 hours is not overtime, right? So we can figure out their preliminary cost of 39.5 hours times $9.50 per hour, which give us a preliminary cost of $375.25. Now, if we follow the formula that was in the last slide, it's going to ask us to take this and multiply times 1 point our percentage, add 1 to that percentage. That 13.8 we would turn into a decimal, 0.138, and add 1 to it to get 1.138, multiply times our preliminary cost to give us our total. Now, that'll work. That'll give you your final standard labor cost, but it doesn't tell you what the actual benefit cost is. And when you get into profit loss statements, you're going to want to know what portion of your labor cost was benefits. So what I like to recommend is, for calculating this, we take our 375.25 and we multiply times our percentage as a decimal to get what our actual benefit cost dollar is. 375.25 times 0.138 gives us a benefits cost of $51.78. So that's our benefits cost. This is our preliminary cost. We add those two together to get our total standard labor cost. Labor cost will be $51.78 plus our $375.25, which will give us a total of $427.03. Which this question is asking for this number. So if you did the 1 plus, you're going to get there, you're going to get the right answer, but you have no idea what the actual benefits cost for this person, right? And it's nice to know what that cost is, especially when you start looking at where your expenses are and how you need to control them. All right, so next example is essentially the same thing that we're going to do, except now we've got a manager, right? A manager on salary making $45,000 per year with a benefits package worth 28.3% of salary. What's the manager's weekly labor cost? Well, in this case, we want to take our $45,000, divide by 365, and then multiply times our 7 days per week. So 45,000 divided by 365 gives us $123.29 per day, times our 7 days per week is going to give us $863.03. Now we have our weekly and we have our benefits. So now I'm going to multiply that times our 0.283 to get our benefit cost. 863.03 times 0.283 gives us $244.24 for our benefits cost. Now to get our total cost, we're going to add our $244.24 plus our weekly preliminary cost of $863.03, give us a total weekly labor cost of $1,107.27. So that's how we calculate the cost weekly for hourly individuals and salaried individuals plus their benefits. To get our departmental costs, we would just take those weekly totals for all the people that work that week and add them together, and we'd have our department's weekly cost. If we're doing a profit loss statement at the end of the month, which we'll get into in later chapters, we would take all 4 weeks that are in that month, add them up, and we would have our monthly labor cost. Okay, I think that's the end of this video. The next one we are going to be going on to talking about our department labor costs.